All of you are like, oh, him again. And then some of you are like, oh, it's been like 2 weeks. He's probably going to talk forever. Yeah, we locked the doors. It's too late. You can't leave. No. Good to see everybody. Well, most of you. Good to see you today. Just a reminder, I know they're going to talk later, but Connect with Crossroads is today. If you are newish around here and we haven't got a chance to meet, love to do that. We're going to meet at the farm tables right after this time that we have here together. And I'm going to need those notes on the back screen there up in the booth. And so make sure that you stick around for a few minutes. I know they're going to have some special whatever up there, out there, some food, and you can ask any question you want. So if you are a guest today, my name is Ryan, and I am the lead pastor here at Crossroads Church. My pronouns are he, him. I am a white, cisgendered, heterosexual male born into a Christian family in the United States of America, which means, yes, I won the privilege jackpot. This country was built and continues in so many ways to be built for people that look like me, that have the belief background I have, that love like me, all of those things. But we also know that that has set up massive systems of oppression and pain and hurt. And so part of what it means to follow Jesus, for me, is to recognize and to model this idea of setting aside privilege and looking for ways in which we can walk this peacemaking path of Jesus to bring about a more just, equitable, inclusive world for everyone, regardless of race, gender, immigration status, all of those things. And that really is what it means to try and live out what Jesus called the kingdom of heaven, right? That's the idea. That's what that metaphor means for us here. So you should know that right off the bat. That's what you're getting yourself into if you're a guest. And if you are a guest and we've never gotten together outside of this crazy place, I'd love to do that as well. My cell phone number's in the program. Send me a text message. We'll set up a time. We'll get together. We'll have coffee. We'll have whiskey. We'll have breakfast. We'll have lunch. We'll have dinner. Whatever works for you, we'll make it happen. I'd love to hear a bit of your story, how our paths have crossed kind of as a faith community, as an individual, and your story as well. All right? Raise your hand up nice and high if you have actually sent me a text message and we have actually gone out, so people know it's not a bait and switch. It's a joke. How many of you actually had to pay? But just Not supposed to. I thought we coached everybody on that one. Do y'all have core memories from growing up? Some of you are growing up, and so you really don't, but say you're over 25, 30 years old, that you have a core memory. Anybody got a core memory? Like if you think of your childhood, there's something, it could be good, could be challenging, right? Could be painful, could be joyful. We have a mix of them. One of my core memories growing up was watching the show The Wonder Years. Some of you I see have like the same kind of experience. How many of you remember the show, The Wonder Years, right? It followed like this young boy, Kevin Arnold, right? And he was growing up in the late 60s, early 70s, which was a little before my time, but even still. And it was this kind of show that it wasn't about childhood, right? Like if you've seen the show, but it was like becoming. It was like a coming of age show, right? And it was about these like quiet internal moments. It was about confusing moments when you realize that kind of life around you is changing. And you're not quite sure what to do with it. You're not quite sure how to hold on to the people that you love while everything around you changes. And so each episode is narrated by an older Kevin, and he's looking back and he's kind of sharing these memories. And he's not looking back with this desire to return, right? I don't know about you, but I would never in a million years go back to middle school. I mean, you couldn't pay me enough money. Like, if reincarnation is a thing, so help me God, if I have to go through middle school again, not doing it. I'm boycotting it. I'm telling my future self right now, when I return to God and God sends me back in some strange way, do not make me do middle school again. Maybe I'll be a dog and I won't have to I'm just kidding. I'm just like going to freak all of you out a little bit. Like, does he really believe? But he wasn't trying to return to his childhood, but he's looking with all this tenderness at kind of how hard it was to live through those moments, right? To live without the wisdom that you gain like later on in life. And so the show understands and portrays something like really important and something very deeply human. That growing up isn't just about new experiences, it's about changing relationships. right? As we grow, our relationships shift and they change. And it's interesting, I think they chose very specifically the song to open that show with because of changing relationships and the uncertainty. Does anybody remember what the song was? What was the song? What was the opening song? Have a little help from my friends? It wasn't the Beatles version, right? It was the Joe Cocker version, right? And they chose that song, I think, because it's a song that doesn't sound confident. It's a vulnerable song. It's a song of like, what's going to happen when I mess up, right? The opening line, what would you do if I sang out of tune? What's the next one? Would you? You want to sing it, I know. 1, 2, 3, what? No, I'm kidding, okay. That's a foreshadowing of things to come. But that question, right? Are you going to walk out on me? Are these relationships going to change? What happens if I mess up? Like, that's kind of the heart of the show, and it's the heart of like change itself, because the fear underneath kind of growing up, the fear underneath change, one of them at least, the fear of becoming something new, right? It's not really about what we're losing. I mean, there is some of that there, and we've talked about that in this series, but it's really about whether or not the people we love are going to stick around with us. Like, through that change. Right? It's whether or not when we look around in the midst of change and we can't be who we were, are we still going to be together? And it really does demonstrate this like great fear of navigating change. Like, we're talking about being in this space between, and one of the fears that we have is, okay, like what's going to happen to the relationships in our lives? And what that boils down to, I think, is that in change, we don't necessarily fear losing the past. I think we fear losing the present. I think that's what happens. And so what I mean by this is that we fear not only losing the familiarity of the present, right? Like what's comfortable to us, right? But the relationships of the present time that sustain us. And I think that's a real, genuine fear. And when we face changes in our lives, right? Whether the changes, whether there are these changes like what we're facing as a faith community, as a church, with moving and transitioning and time, where are we going to meet, and renovation and all of that stuff, or whether the change is appearing a little closer to home in your family of some sort, one of the fears that holds us back is the fear of what will happen to meaningful relationships, right? That's true for a church community, and it's true for families. Because whether we're talking about a congregation or a kitchen table, change doesn't just shift our structures, it shifts our relationships. Sometimes it's more than physical change. Sometimes it's a positionality in life. Sometimes we change our opinions, we change our beliefs. And there's a shift that happens in our relationships. And in churches, right? In churches, it sounds like this. What if the move creates sides? Not this building, this place, not this time, not this amount of services. What are we, this, ha, he, right? What if it creates sides? Or what if people I love don't feel the same way I do about a change like this? What if disagreement becomes distance? What if moving forward costs us one another? What if a change happens? What if our change happens and people go, you know what? It's too big of a drive, or it's not far enough away from my regular life. I don't want people to see me there. I don't know, like we think about these things. And in our families, that fear sounds a little quieter. It might sound a little closer to home. It might sound something more like, what if this conversation changes how they see me? What if my growth feels like rejection to them? What if naming what's true creates this rupture in our relationship that we just can't repair? What if we don't even recognize each other anymore? Like, the fear is the same. It's just the setting is different, whether it's family or church or a friendship or a mentorship. Because here's the thing, in families, when it's family, and in a lot of ways, we describe church as a type of family, right? In families, belonging isn't theoretical. It's not just something we talk about and we say, how does it happen? How do people belong? It's very, very personal. And it's this big fear that if I change, I'll disappoint someone that I love. I'll disrupt the story that we've always talked about and we've shared together. I'll be seen as the difficult one, or I'll be the ungrateful one, or I'll be the disloyal one. So what do? Well, we kind of stay quiet. We manage ourselves. We choose what we think is peace over truth. But really, it's just kind of a quiet that will eventually become resentment. And whether it's with a family or whether it's with a faith community, the pattern stays the same. We don't resist change, not because we don't want growth. Often we resist that change because we don't want to avoid risking relational loss. So I won't speak up. I won't share what I'm feeling. I won't talk about what my needs are because, oh man, what if I lose this person? What if they don't stick with me? And if we're honest, the greatest fear in any kind of change isn't losing the past, it's losing each other. Because belonging matters far more to us, or it should, than being right. Connection matters more than clarity. And that's why resistance in change often shows up in relationships, not as anger, believe it or not, but as carefulness. And we'll say things like, well, now just isn't the right time. Right? That's resistance. Now just isn't the right time. Let's not rock the boat. Can't we just keep things the way they are? Isn't things fine, right? But what we're really saying in all of this is, I don't want this, in this change, like, I don't want to lose you. In this change, like, I don't want to separate from you. And this is where kind of the micro community of a family or a relationship and macro communities kind of collide together, because families, like churches, we can often confuse something like agreement with safety. And simply agreeing to not do anything or simply agreeing not to speak doesn't necessarily create a safe space. Forced agreement, even though it feels safer than relational risk, always comes at a cost. Forced agreement, get in line or get out, right? Oh, we're all unified, right? It feels risky to give space for disagreement and for conversation in our relationships, in our church community. But if we don't, there's a cost that comes. And what happens is we start to hide part of ourselves. We start to edit our feelings and our questions. And all of a sudden, silence happens. Silence happens. Grief is silenced, or even excitement is silenced. And eventually the relationship will suffer, not because somebody changed, but because honesty wasn't welcome anymore. And so the real truth that we rarely say out loud is this, is that relationship fractures, right? Relationships, they fracture in our lives, not when we change, but when we stop listening to one another in the midst of change. Right? That's the real issue here. Our relationships don't fracture simply because of change. Our relationships fracture because we won't listen to one another in the midst of change. We won't give each other the space to experience change as we need to. And fear convinces us that difference, right? Even disagreement equals danger, or it equals disconnection. And the question beneath all of this for churches and families is the same. Can we change without losing each other? You think about your own relationships. If you're in a significant relationship with someone, an intimate relationship with someone, and you are growing, you are changing, and maybe you're growing into something that is outside of the comfort zone of someone in your life. Maybe it's a new way of seeing the world. Maybe it's a new hobby, a new activity. The question is, can we change without losing one another? Can we stay in relationship when our emotions aren't necessarily aligned? When our pace isn't the same, when our hopes and our fears don't match? Can we still stay in relationship? And this isn't a question that we just rush past and go, well, if you love Jesus, then it should be okay. We can't just rush past that, because at the heart of healthy transformation, right, is this question: can we change together? Can we be together in the midst of change and growth? And this is a huge part. If we're going to change in any area of our lives, can we slow down? Can we speed up together? Can we create the space for honesty and vulnerability and not see that as accusation? And that's wildly important. And it is a question that Scripture actually takes seriously. And it's exactly the moment we see happening if we look at Acts chapter 15, which we're going to. Isn't that crazy? This is the exact issue that's happening in Acts chapter 15. Now, if you're kind of new to the Bible, or maybe you set the Bible aside and you were like, no thank you, tired of getting beat up by that book, totally get it. Around here, we do not read the scriptures as a rule book. We don't read the scripture. We don't follow the Bible, at least I don't. And I know that sounds weird to some of us, but I actually think following the Bible is one of the worst ideas in human history. We have had so much violence because people thought they were following the Bible. I'm more interested in following the teachings of Jesus that are found in the Bible. I'm more interested in following love. And so we come to Scripture as these are important documents in our tradition. They offer us wisdom. They offer us human struggles that we see in our spiritual ancestors. And so every week we come to this text, not looking for like a helicopter parent who's going to scoop in and God's going to just tell us exactly what to do, but to say, are there patterns? Is there wisdom that we can find and discern? And there's an interesting story that happens in Acts chapter 15. Now, the book of Acts, if you're not familiar with this, is kind of the beginning of this Jesus movement. And I want to call it the Jesus movement because it wasn't Christianity, okay? I don't believe that Jesus came to start a new religion or anything like that. It's just what we specialize in as humans, right? How could we divide each other? I know, we'll leverage God, okay? But Jesus comes, and there's a group of people within Judaism, right, who are saying, hey, we think this Jesus guy had something to say, and we should listen to it. And so there's this movement that is happening within the Jewish community. And Acts chapter 15 is like this kind of story of how it spread, and stories about how this like really odd, strange power seemed to kind of like overwhelm people who were following this Jesus. And in Acts chapter 15, we find not a calm, little polite, tidy theological discussion. We find a community that is in relational crisis. The very heart of what they understood as like symbolizing their unity, who they are as a people, is under question, right? So what we would call the ecclesia, the called out ones, the church, the following of Jesus is growing. And this movement that started within Judaism, right, is moving out into the Gentile world, right? So non-Jews, right? And Gentiles were like men, male Gentiles were uncircumcised, all right? And traditionally speaking, to become part of the Jewish community, you would go through the rite of circumcision. Didn't matter how old you were, it's just gonna happen. You wanna be a Jew? This is what you do. Because this is like the mark of this is our covenant that Abraham made with God. And this is what we're supposed to do. So we're going to do it. And so they've been doing all this. But all of a sudden you have all these Gentiles and they're following Jesus. And then they're being told by a group of people, hey, this is wonderful. Circumcision starts next Saturday. And they're like, I'm out. Like the language of Acts, the Spirit is clearly moving, but not everybody's on board, right? Not everybody understands how to hold the movement together when you have change taking place, like hardcore identity change. So Acts chapter 15, starting in verse 5, says this. Some believers, like followers of Jesus, they believed that Jesus brought this new vision of God into their midst, into faith. They believed, some of these believers who belonged to the party of the Pharisees. Now, can we pause there for a second? Because this is a really important little statement, because the Pharisees get such a bad rap. If you've like read the New Testament, like the Pharisees are like terrible human beings. They're foils for like what the author is saying. They're caricatured, they're terrible. But can we just like recognize that there are Pharisees who are following Jesus? For some of you, that's like a Republican following Jesus. For some of you, that's like a Democrat following Jesus, right? But like, and you have to remember, Pharisees were like political parties. They were just political parties, but politics, theology was all intermixed together. It still is today, we just don't want to talk about it like it is, but at any rate. So there's some of there within the Pharisees that are following Jesus, and they stand up. And the Pharisees are pretty traditionalists, right? So the Pharisees are like down with Rome, like they're nationalist-oriented. They're like the Jewish people, Jewish community, this is what makes us who we are, right? Everybody needs to conform or get out, kind of like hard. Then that's a caricature. I shouldn't do that, okay? But that's kind of what we're told, and we're given this picture. So the Pharisees are very much into the law of Moses, very passionate about their faith. And so they're like, whoa, it's necessary. They need to be circumcised, and they need to be ordered to keep the law of Moses. Not a small ask on both fronts, right? Circumcision, oh, and by the way, here's the law of Moses. just a few 400 or 500 commands. Don't worry about it. You'll catch on. We'll keep it simple for you. And they're like, no, you have to do it because this is what it means to be Jewish. This is what it means to be a follower of Jesus. Yeah, it's part of it, but this is what we do. And sometimes we read that and we just treat it like this doctrinal footnote, but it's not. It is fear. Like, who are we if we're not this? Who are we if we aren't the people that follow the law of Moses? Who are we if we aren't the circumcised ones? If we change too much, we're going to lose who we are. How will we even know each other? Which is an interesting thought. I don't know that they went around checking, but at any rate, are you Jewish? Prove it. It could be an awkward moment on the streets of Jerusalem. I don't know. Some of you are never coming back after that humor. But ultimately, they're wrestling with this fear that identity is going to dissolve, traditions are going to disappear, something sacred is going to be left behind. And on the other side of this conversation are those whose lived experience says, what are you talking about? The Spirit is already doing something new. Like, what are you talking about? Like God is at work in these people who don't follow the law of Moses. They aren't circumcised. So what are you saying? It goes on, it says that the apostles and the elders, they met together to consider this matter. And so they're talking and they're coming together. And what are they doing? They're listening and they're learning. They're listening and they're learning to one another. And this line matters more often than we realize. They don't just rush to a vote. They don't just say, well, I have the authority. I'm in charge. Do what I say. They didn't silence dissent. They didn't frame disagreement as disloyalty. Oh, you're not a real follower of Jesus if you don't think people should have to follow the law of Moses. Oh, well, you just want everybody to be miserable like you follow the law of Moses. Like they didn't, none of that. They just met together. And here's what verse 7 says. There had been much debate. All right, so this group of leaders, they come together and they're debating the issue. It's not a little debate. Oh my goodness, we think, oh, they're following Jesus, so it must have just been like the fellowship hall and potluck and homemade cornbread and chili and cinnamon rolls. What the heck is up with that? They did that in Maine all the time, like chili and cinnamon rolls. I've seen that around here too. Some of you are clapping. I pray deliverance for you. Let's just keep the chili and the cinnamon rolls in their own zones, all right? That's crazy talk. But it says much debate. I don't know if you know anything about the Jewish tradition, but the Jewish tradition loves debate. We have a hard time understanding because we grow up in like conformity, Eurocentric, white, everybody does it this way. But like in the Jewish tradition, it's like, you know, there's a funny like joke about like three rabbis arguing about the meaning of a passage, and God comes down and tells them what the passage means, and the three rabbis look at God and go, who do you think you are telling us what it means? Like, get out of here. You gave it to us, this is ours to deal with, right? So like, we just need to understand this is a robust, there were emotions present. How could there not be? Identities involved. But that's kind of what shared learning and transition looks like. Being in the same place, representing your ideas, talking about what's important to you. And then Peter speaks. Everybody gets a little nervous. Peter's like, I got something to say. But like, oh, hold on. Peter's got something to say. This should be good. Now he speaks, and he doesn't speak up to win, but he offers a witness. And in verse 8, he says, God made a choice among you that the Gentiles should hear the good news. And God, who knows the human heart, testified to them. Like, I'm just telling you what I've seen. This is what I've experienced. And then a few verses later, in verse 12, Paul and Barnabas, these two rogue individuals who are off doing their own thing, they come back, they're here for this, they're back in Jerusalem for this council, and they stand up again, not to argue, but to give testimony. And they tell of all the signs and all the wonders and all the beautiful things that God had done with them and through them with these Gentile people. And if we're carefully and we read it carefully and we look at this story, we'll notice what holds the gathering together, what holds the space. Nobody is shamed for their fear. Nobody is silenced for their questions. No one is rushed faster or past their pace. It's not forced agreement. It's relational discernment. And after all this takes place, James, who tradition says is the brother of Jesus, who is head of the church in Jerusalem, James speaks, not as a ruler, but as one who has listened. He's been a listener, and he's grounded in this moment, and he's grounded in his understanding of Scripture, and he's grounded in his own memory, and he's grounded in care for one another, and he's grounded in his understanding that God is at work doing new things. And so the community decides to write a letter. And inside that letter, it contains one of the most relationally humble lines in all of our Scriptures, and it is incredibly important. And we see it in verse 28. This is what it says. James writes this letter. It has seemed good to the Holy Spirit and to us. Now, I hope you understand the decision that was made. If you're kind of part of the Christian tradition, you know that circumcision and following the law of Moses are not compulsory. So we know what the decision was, right? But this is a beautiful statement. It seemed good to the Holy Spirit and to us. Not, God told us, that's the end of it. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've been in a lot of religious settings where people who have my job and my title stand up and say, God told me. And that is supposed to validate the decision and end all conversation. So, like, you will not hear me ever say God. I've said it too many times to be like, what the heck was I thinking? That wasn't God. That was my own fear. That was my own ego. That was whatever. But that's not what happens here. It's not, hey, listen, some of them were wrong. It's not what he writes. But the right ones prevailed. He didn't write fall in line. No. He says, listen, we listened together. We learned from one another. We stayed in the room long enough to hear both what we felt was the Spirit and to hear one another, and we came to this space. And so we don't want to miss this, that change that keeps relationships together requires trust and humility. Now, I don't believe for a second that those leaders came in that room and at the end of the discussion, they were like, unanimous, let's throw away the law of Moses for the Gentiles and let's get rid of circumcision. There's no possible way that happens. You can't even get a family of 4 to figure out where to go have dinner and all agree on it. Tell me you're going to get a group of 50 religious leaders and a brand new fledgling movement to come to an agreement on something as big as that. No. But they at least came to a space that said we can be together. And it seems good to that. I don't get it. I don't understand it. Doesn't say everybody felt the same. It just tells us that they stayed connected. Unity did not require identical emotions. Faithfulness didn't require uniform agreement. What mattered was what? What mattered was this. No one in that leadership group was excluded from the process. Nobody started to speak and their voice was, no, your experience, Peter, doesn't matter. We know you did the whole like cock crowing moment. You don't count. You're a Pharisee. Haven't you read Matthew? You don't know what the Pharisees did? Of course, Come on. How could a Pharisee have an opinion about Jesus? You need to just It was the precursor to the Austin Powers scene. Not that I've ever seen that trash, so. I'm a Christian. I knew that was coming. Somebody shouted, really? Depends on who you ask. So, nobody was shamed for their voice, their thoughts, their opinions, their fears. Nobody was silenced because they had questions. And that's how communities and that's how families survive change. We listen to one another. We don't pretend that disagreement doesn't exist, right? No. We also don't demand that everybody moves at the same pace and they have to like it. But we choose relationship as the container for transformation, that we sit with it. And we're present with people's fears. Reality sometimes moves at a pace faster than what we're comfortable with. And just because we can't change the reality of that pace, that doesn't mean we can't sit with someone and validate their concern about the pace and validate their concern about the change. And that's a beautiful place to be. And so we choose that relationship, not asking to agree on everything, but just to stay connected in our families and as a church. And that may be the bravest work in all of this, to be able to sit together and see things differently and trust and be and love and care and listen. And so in your everyday normal life, because I know that when you leave here tomorrow, you are not fixated on how the church move is going. I'm sure you wonder about it every now and then, but I'm sure you have your own problems and your own changes and all these things that are happening in your everyday normal life. So how do you live this out there? First of all, name your pace without judging others' pace. You're in the midst of change, something happening in your work, in your family, in your own spirit, in our church. Just name your pace, but don't judge others for being in a different place. Some of you are super excited about our move. Some of you, not so much. Some of you are ready for it to happen yesterday. Some of you, no. And so we need to name that. And one of the fastest ways that our relationships will fracture during changes is when we assume that everybody should move at the same speed I do. I have been guilty of this. I'm a change person. It's part of my personality. Just part of my wired around change theory, navigating change. Crazy how the universe brought me here. Right? But it's inappropriate and it will produce relational problems when I expect everybody, or when you expect everybody to be at your pace, whether it's a slower pace or a faster pace, either way. So some people move quickly towards hope, and some people a little more slow because of their grief, because of their sorrow, because of their experiences. Some people get excited, some people become fearful. None of these responses are wrong. In your life, as people, as you make changes, as things happen around you, remember that there's no wrong emotional response. There's just real emotional responses. And there's the choice to be present in the midst of it. Acts 15 allowed lots of debate, not because the leaders were indecisive, but because they respected emotional pacing. Everybody needs to speak. Now, I remind you, Acts 15 was a group of leaders, okay? They did not bring the whole assembly together and be like, let's talk about this. Okay? So there's a whole organizational side there I want to be really clear on. In your life, for example, I would translate that wisdom into sometimes mom and mom need to get together and make a decision over the family and not include the kids. You know what I'm saying? Some of you are just stuck because I said mom and mom, but it's a real thing. It's a real thing. Right? Sometimes the adults need to get in the room in that scenario and make decisions for the future of a family and then walk children through it. That doesn't mean impose, not involve, but there's wisdom in knowing, okay, what table am I setting? Who are the voices that it's important to be present at that table? How do we listen? How do we come to that conclusion, all right? And so we exercise that wisdom. And so this practice, say where you are without making a demand on others. And that can sound like a couple of things. Hey, I'm not there yet, but I'm staying engaged. I'm excited, and I'm trying to stay patient, right? Two opposite emotions that you're feeling in an experience in your family, let's say. I need time, not because I'm resistant, but because I care, because I just have questions. And so when we name this pace that we're at, honestly, when we stop forcing people to interrupt our silence or our urgency, or when we stop interpreting, people's silence as being against our urgency or being hostile towards our ideas, right? When we can just allow each other to go at our pace, it protects relationship by replacing assumptions with clarity. Help me understand. I love that question. Help me understand. Another thing we can do in our everyday normal life is practice testimony instead of argument. Anybody grow up at a church that had testimony night? Right? Every now and then I have this thought, we should do that. And then everybody on the team's like, what is wrong with you, Ryan? There's no open mic night at Crossroads, And then I stand up here and look out in the crowd. I'm like, no, good choice. We should not give some of these folks a microphone. No, I'm just kidding. right? But here's the thing. In Acts 15, Peter doesn't argue. Paul and Barnabas don't debate. They just simply testify. This is my experience. And that experience matters. There's truth in that experience. There's honesty in it. They tell stories about what they've seen God do, not arguments trying to win. See, testimony invites understanding of experience. And so what this looks like, speak from your lived experience, not your conclusions. Right? Speak from your experience in a conversation where there is tension, not from your conclusion. This is the wrong thing to do. No. Don't say things like, well, this is obviously the right move. That never works with someone on the fence, okay? But don't say things like, I don't see why this is such a big deal. Again, not a beautiful statement in the midst of trying to maintain relationships. Maybe try something like, here's what I'm feeling about this and why I feel this way. See, that's really hard to argue with. One thing I've learned is when I start to express like the way I feel and someone says to me or starts to invalidate that, I get to say, listen, we can talk about a lot of things, but guess what you don't get to invalidate is my feelings. That's not on the table. You don't get to invalidate my story. You don't get to invalidate the things that I know to be true because of my lived realities. We can debate all kinds of things, but that's not on the table. Another way you could say this is, here's what I've experienced that's shaping my hope or that's shaping my fear in this moment. Some of you are like, Ryan, I would never talk like that. Shaping my hope. All right, well, do whatever keeps working for you then. We got to try new things. We got to try new vocabulary, new ways of being if we want to experience new ways of living, right? How about, here's why this change, here's how this change touches my story and why it either has me excited or why it has me nervous. But see, testimony can slow down the conversation, right? It can create space for us to listen instead of being defensive. And it reminds us that when we're people coming together, we're not debating ideas, we're actually caring for one another. We're coming alongside each other. And then third, I want to encourage you to commit to staying in the room. How many of you are door slammers? Raise your hand up nice and high. The conversation goes a way you don't like it, and you're like, oh yeah? Watch this. Bam! Out the door. Here's the thing. The most relationally damaging move during change is not disagreement. It's disengagement. It's disengagement. Engagement is difficult. It is hard to set aside our emotions and turn the channel. You know, old TVs are some of us just live on the channel of defense and talk. White heterosexual males, right? Our opinions should matter more for some reason. Oh, that's right. The world has told us that. But they don't. And so we have to change the channel of the moment. Be like, okay, this is my space not to talk. It's my space to listen. And listening isn't waiting to say what I want to say. But I have to actually I have to embody this. I have to set aside what I know in my heart to be the right thing to do, to pause and listen and to stay engaged. When we leave conversations, when we avoid people, when we withdraw emotionally while staying physically present, those are all recipes for relational fracture. And so Acts 15 works, right? Because they stayed together long enough to hear the Spirit in one another. They stayed together long enough. You know, one of the dumbest questions, I shouldn't say it that way, sorry. Let me say it. One of the most misinformed, misguided questions I experienced and still sometimes will experience is when people want to go into following some of the biblical passages around marriage, right? And they'll say, well, there's got to be a head of the household because what if there's a disagreement? Who gets to decide? I would say the person who wants the marriage to end gets to decide. In our context, in our cultural context, it's a question that is bound for disaster. Because love is the head of the household, right? And love is patient and love is kind. It does not envy. It does not control. And so you sit together as long as it takes to find the space that seems right to you and the Holy Spirit. But that's difficult. And so here's the practice. Make a conscious commitment to stay in relationship even when it's uncomfortable. And this can sound like, this is really hard, but I'm not going anywhere. This is really difficult, but I'm not going. I don't agree, but I want to listen. I want to understand. I need space, but not distance. I need space to think and process what I just heard, but that's not distance from you. I love you. We're together. And so staying in the room doesn't mean endless discussion either. Like, don't take that literally. Like, we're not leaving this room until we come to, like 8 days later, nobody's eaten, right? Everybody's sick, emaciated, right? No. It just means refusing to turn difference into disconnection. And that's how trust is built. Not by avoiding tension, but by surviving it together. By building a memory. And believe it or not, this will make you a better person. It will make the world a better place. It will make our church a better space. These practices, they don't guarantee easy change. They don't say, oh, if you'll just do this, then everything's going to be wonderful. No, but they protect what matters most, our relationships. When we name our pace, when we speak from our experience, right? When we stay in the room, we create change that can happen without losing each other. And that's what Acts 15 invites us into. And it's still holy work, difficult work. It's a different way of doing things. But whether it's our families, our work, or our church, whatever community we find ourselves in, when we navigate change with trust and humility, we build greater intimacy and unity on the other side of it. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a marriage counselor. I would be terrible at those things. I don't have the patience for it. I just want to tell people what to do. That's why I became a pastor. But when I do have the opportunity to sit with folks that are in struggle and offer some spiritual musings, one thing I learned is that on the other side of conflict that is handled in a healthy way is intimacy. That's why you get through it, right? That's the wilderness. The wilderness of conflict, if you navigate it well, on the other side is the promised land of intimacy. And that's what Acts 15 tells us. So as we have communion together, what is it that God's inviting you into today? We ask this question every time we gather. I don't believe you're here because I'm handsome. I don't believe you're here because you have nothing better to do on a Sunday. I really do believe you're here and that there is a purpose that you can imbibe into this experience. And I think this question helps us do that. Like, what am I feeling invited into today? It could be something from the message. It could be something completely different. You met someone today for the first time and they shared something. You're like, I need to follow up with them. That's what I'm being invited into today. Whatever it might be, but maybe it centers around our topic. A couple of things you might feel an invitation, a whisper towards today. And that is to sit with other people, sit with those people that you are navigating change with. Just sit with them and listen. Could be something at work, at home, could be here at church, whatever it might be. There's change happening, just sit with them. That's the invitation. Maybe the invitation is to stop judging others who aren't changing at your pace. Maybe you've held some bitterness towards people in your life who aren't moving at the pace you want them to move. And rather than either changing your pace a little bit, to either catch up to or to slow down with, you just sat in a space of bitterness and it's kind of a bitter root in your heart and it's affecting that relationship. I found a great article. If you want something, it's not long at all. It's a kind of a blog post called 4 Ways to Stay Close When Growing in Different Directions. It's probably better than this message. I mean, 4 ways, it's perfect, right? Simple, 4. If you want, maybe just read that. Maybe read that with somebody you care about deeply. Read it together and then talk about it. Again, you're like, this is crazy nonsense, Ryan. We're going to watch TV tomorrow. Great, watch TV tomorrow, okay? I'm not against that at all. I love it. But I would encourage you that new practices produce new results in our lives. And so maybe it's like, hey, we're good, but guess what? Like, we're going to grow in different directions. There's going to be change. Maybe we should preemptively think about this and read this together. I don't know. So you might have guessed it. Our communion song today is Have a Little Help from My Friends. And not the Beatles' happy version. like the Joe Cocker version, that's not polished or confident, but vulnerable. Like, what's going to happen when I fail? What's going to happen when I mess up? Are you going to be there? Are you going to help carry me? Because I just need that help. I need that. And so this song asks that question that many of us carry in this season of change. If I stumble, will you stay? And so as you kind of receive communion today, as a reminder, everybody's welcome. There's no class to go through, document to sign, thing to believe. It's just an invitation to experience this radical idea of love. And so hold that question with you. Hold the question of, will I be present in the midst of change? Will they be present with me? Where do you need help right now? Where could you use a friend coming alongside of you? And who is it that God is inviting you to stay connected to as things change? And in this moment today, I hope that the table can remind every one of us that we are never, ever meant to do this alone, and that we are never alone. And so I hope that this prayer, this song can be a prayer for us and a promise that we'll be people who stay with our friends, that we'll be people who don't allow things to get in the way of relationships that shouldn't. Some things should. I get that. That's a different talk. But we'll stay together and we'll find our way forward together. And the communion table reminds us that God, the universe, love, whatever words you like to use, God's user-friendly. That's the way I think of it. Whatever word works for you, that God love never walks out on us. Never walks out on us. The tradition of Jesus tells us that God never leaves us, never forsakes us, never abandons us, and that this love is present with us in every journey, in every change. So I'm going to invite you to stand if you're able to. The body of Christ broken for you, the blood of Christ shed for you, as you long for people in your lives to offer a little help when it's needed.